Hello. Now that we've covered strategy in the earlier portion of the course, and we've pretty thoroughly covered processes to either provide a good or a service, now we're going to start applying some of those concepts in more of a broader viewpoint. We were initially looking more within one operation or within one company, but now we're going to start looking broader, as I said, and looking at an entire supply chain. So from the earliest raw material supplier through all the companies or entities that may add value to that raw material, and then ultimately getting it to the final customer. So we'll start talking about that from more of a global perspective in this chapter, and I think you can agree and understand that we definitely have a global marketplace, and that global marketplace continues to grow. So you can see the learning objectives for this module, just two that I'll kind of point out. One is this bullwhip effect. It's really gotten a lot of visibility and attention in supply chain management, and we'll cover it in more detail, but really it's just an overreaction. So one person or one company in the supply chain overreacts, and then that overreaction gets magnified as you go up the supply chain, so it can create a lot of waste. And the other point is the green sourcing. That's the newest initiative. You've seen a lot of commercials recently about companies either promoting that they have a green product or a green process, and I think it really is influencing a lot of consumer behavior. So referring back to the strategy sections at the beginning of this course, what we're doing here is we're really getting away from this transactional purchasing, where we're just finding the lowest cost, buying the item maybe only once from a supplier and never dealing with them again. And here we're moving to the complete opposite end of the spectrum, where we're establishing a long-term relationship and partnership with our suppliers. And there are several reasons that this can be beneficial, but going back to the term strategic here, it's really about if something is really strategic or important to our company, a raw material or a subassembly or some type of service. If we really need that to be successful in our business, then we need to establish and develop and maintain a long-term relationship with that supplier. And I'd like for you to think about this as working both ways. There's advantages to the supplier and the buyer. There are also risks to the supplier and the buyer, but we develop really a mutually dependent and a mutually beneficial relationship. So strategic sourcing will not apply to everything that we're buying and selling throughout the supply chain. Commodity type items, not much differentiation among the items, and many suppliers that offer these products or services. We're going to still treat those more on a transactional relationship, and cost is probably going to be our main driver. But as the product or the service gets more technical or more sophisticated or maybe more important to our company, then that's when we're going to move more towards this strategic sourcing end of the spectrum. So the slide talks about an RFP, and we're probably going to use that tool in either environment, either the transactional, maybe the one-time buy, or in developing a longer-term relationship. It's just more related to the frequency. If we're doing one-time buys, we're going to be sending out RFPs all the time, but if we're looking at developing a relationship, we'll send them out initially and then narrow the field of candidates, and then finally select one, and then hopefully if that works out successfully, we won't need to be sending out RFPs very frequently after that. But just a little more detail on that point. The process could start with an RFI, a request for information. just trying to determine which candidates are out there that may have the potential to provide this good or this service for us. And then we might, from that group of people, then decide which ones to send out RFPs to. And then we'll evaluate those RFPs or the responses to the RFPs and finally select a supplier or a number of suppliers. And then the next step would either be a purchase order, a PO, in the case of maybe more of a commodity type item, or a contract in the case of a longer term relationship. This whole VMI topic has taken on a lot of focus and attention in the recent past. You can see a lot of examples of it in grocery stores and convenience stores and things like that. And I believe it is a good concept, and I think it is beneficial. But I still like to go back to the no free lunch concept. The vendor or the supplier is going to have to pay people to do that management, and they're carrying the inventory. So there's no free lunch. It's going to have to be recovered, or the cost of doing these things is going to have to be recovered in the piece price. So as I mentioned, the bullwhip effect is just an overreaction that magnifies up the supply chain. Take a look at the graphs or the charts in your book, and you can kind of see some of the impacts of the bullwhip effect, and it really results in a lot of waste and possibly excess inventory in the supply chain. So one way to counteract or minimize the bullwhip effect is to use CPFR. So that's collaborative planning, forecasting, and replenishment, where we're using common information among many of the partners in the supply chain, so that we're using the same information. You might think of it as we're trying to sing off the same sheet of music. And this continuous replenishment topic can also help to minimize that bullwhip effect. We're reviewing our inventory levels more frequently, and therefore we are replenishing or replacing the inventory in smaller increments or smaller batch sizes. This slide and the following one show ways to classify products, and based on where the product fits into this classification, we may either use transactional purchasing or strategic sourcing, and we probably also will design our supply chain differently to handle, in this case, the functional product, and you can see a definition of what these are. So in the case of these functional products, we're probably closer to the transactional purchasing end of the spectrum from the way we do our procurement. And then within our supply chain, we're probably going to focus more on making our supply chain efficient. But the opposite of that, in the case of these innovative products, we're probably going to look at a different purchasing strategy. And even though the product life cycle is usually very short with innovative products, we're probably not going to have as many potential suppliers out there, so we may need to look at more of a relationship-based strategic sourcing. And because we have a very short maturity phase of the product life cycle, so in the case of these products, most of the life cycle is going to be consumed with the growth and the decline phase, we're going to need to configure our supply chain differently, and we'll probably be looking at more of an agile supply chain or a responsive supply chain, again because we don't have any long period of product maturity where we have time to look more at developing efficiencies. So these are a listing of at least some of the types of the supply chains or supply chain strategies that I've talked about. And again, I like to look at it from a product life cycle relationship. So if we have a product with a very long maturity phase, we have a lot of stability, then we have time to focus on number one and make our supply chain as efficient as possible. But if it's an innovative product, a short life cycle, we don't have that luxury, so we're going to be focusing more on either the third one or the fourth one, the responsive or the agility in our supply chain. And on the second bullet point, really, I guess since 9/11 and with all the increase in terrorist activities throughout the world, people are looking a lot more at trying to make their supply chains as risk averse as possible, and identifying potential risks and identifying potential countermeasures for those risks. So you may have seen these risk assessment techniques in a lot of fields, data security, things like that. But as I said, it has become very visible and really a focal point in many supply chains and in the strategy behind planning those supply chains. And the other factor, as I said earlier, would be this whole global marketplace. So that has brought an added degree of risk into our supply chain. So the more global we are, the more we're going to have to consider the at least potential risks to our supply chain. So a lot of companies are using outsourcing. A lot of supply chains have been built around the concept of outsourcing. And I think it really comes back to this whole concept of core competencies. So let's identify what our company or our operation is really good at doing, and let's focus on that. And the things that we don't do well, then let's find a good partner to perform those services or those functions for us, and then they can specialize on those things that we do well, so we're each focusing on our core competencies. And you may have heard the term privatizing or privatization in some of the political discussions. Really, that is just another word for outsourcing, but when the government decides to outsource something, they call it privatizing. So again, green sourcing being probably the newest initiative of things that we're discussing in this chapter, I do believe it does affect consumer purchasing behavior and decisions. So it can result in more business to our company or to our supply chain. And I think it also has the added benefit of being a way to identify and eliminate and reduce waste within a supply chain. And it certainly fits well with this whole concept of sustainability. So trying to do something or do things that will allow our business to continue into the long term. And if we're not being green, then that's going to be detrimental to this whole sustainability concept. And this total cost of ownership topic really fits well with what we talked about earlier, the continuum between strategic buying, or strategic sourcing and transactional purchasing. So if we're looking at transactional purchasing, again focused on price or cost, we're probably only really looking at in depth the cost to buy that item or to purchase that service, just the initial upfront cost. But if we're closer to the other end of the spectrum, looking at strategic sourcing, then we're looking more at the lifetime cost of that thing that we're buying. So of course, what does it cost to buy it initially, but what is the cost of maintenance over the lifetime? Maybe what is the cost of disposal of the item at the end of its life? And we have talked earlier about a supply chain having a returning function, so not just the supplying of the original product or service that we're providing, but returning that product when its useful life is over. So that concept really plays well with this total cost of ownership analysis. I really like the saying, what gets measured gets done. And in any operation or any supply chain, if you don't have metrics and actually record your results and track your results, things aren't going to improve. I think these are only two viewpoints of sourcing performance. I think there are several other metrics or KPIs, key performance indicators, So it might be quality, on-time delivery, reliability of delivery, just a lot of things that you might think about when you're purchasing something for yourself. And the 2 bullet points on this slide are really ways of evaluating our inventory management, or the success, I guess, of our inventory management. And these 2 topics are just really alternate ways to look at the same result. So if we look at inventory turnover, you can see the equation in your book. We're just really measuring or analyzing how quickly is product flowing through our supply chain. And the higher number of turns, that indicates that product is flowing faster through our supply chain and not sitting, not being used for a long period of time. So if you think of it in those terms, then you can see that the weeks of supply, or some period of supply, it may be days or it may be months, there's nothing magical about weeks, but the higher the inventory turns, the lower the time period of supply will be. So maybe just to make this a little bit more clear, if we try to compare numbers that would make these 2 equivalent, let's say we had an inventory turnover of 1. So that's saying that our cost of goods sold and our average inventory are equal. So in effect, that amount of inventory is only moving through our system 1 time in a year. So you would convert that or equate that to having, in this case, if we were using weeks of supply, that would be the same as having 52 weeks of supply on hand, or 1 year of inventory on hand. So I hope this has helped explain some of the fundamentals of this pretty much introductory chapter to supply chain. I mean, we definitely do have a global marketplace. It's brought a lot of complexity into our supply chains that we wouldn't have with more of a regionalized supply chain. We need to look at what type of sourcing arrangements we need to implement for various types of goods or services, and especially in view of what type of good or service it is that we're buying. Is it innovative or is it functional? And again, that association with the product life cycle. And then finally, we need to set key performance indicators and track our progress so that we'll be employing at least some amount of continuous improvement in our supply chain. So if you have any questions on this, please let me know through Blackboard email. Thank you.